Oh, so I'm just a free 24/7 nanny now? You think my only purpose in retirement is to scrub your floors and raise the children you chose to have while you jet off to Bali? Well, sweetie, think again. This house isn't a hotel, I'm not your employee, and you're about to find out exactly what happens when you push a patient woman too far. My name is Evelyn, and at 67 years old, I finally thought I had reached the finish line of a very long, exhausting race. For nearly 4 decades, I worked as a senior administrator for a large public school district, a job that required me to be the calm in the center of a never-ending storm of budgets, bureaucracy, and high-strung parents. When I retired, I didn't just walk away from a paycheck. I walked toward the freedom I had sacrificed for my entire adult life. I live in a charming colonial home in a quiet suburb of Connecticut, a place filled with memories of my late husband, Arthur, and the scent of the peonies I finally have time to tend to in my garden. I am financially stable, mentally sharp, and deeply protective of the peace I've built in my widowhood. Then there is my son, James. He is a good man, a hardworking architect, but he has a blind spot the size of a mountain when it comes to his wife, Sarah. Sarah is 31, a self-proclaimed digital creator who spends more time curating her life on social media than actually living it. To her, everything is a transaction, and everyone is a prop. We have 2 beautiful grandchildren, Oliver, who is 4, and Sophie, who just turned 2. I love those children with a ferocity that scares me sometimes. They are the living legacy of Arthur and me. However, over the last year, I've felt my role shifting in a way that makes my blood run cold. Sarah doesn't see me as a grandmother to be respected or a woman with her own life. To her, I am a 24/7 on-call service, a free resource that allows her to maintain her aesthetic lifestyle without the messiness of full-time parenting. She sees my retirement as an open invitation to dump her responsibilities at my doorstep, and James, bless his heart, is too busy or too tired to see how much she is taking advantage of my love for those kids. Deep beneath my composed exterior lies a well of anxiety that I've spent years trying to pave over. You see, being a mother in my generation meant being on all the time. When James was young, Arthur traveled constantly for work, leaving me to balance a high-stakes career and a household entirely on my own. I remember the bone-deep exhaustion, the nights I cried in the bathroom so James wouldn't see my weakness, and the constant, gnawing fear that I wasn't doing enough. I sacrificed my hobbies, my friendships, and my own health to ensure my son had everything. Now that I'm older, that old trauma of being trapped by domestic duty has resurfaced, but this time, it's tinged with a bitter sense of injustice. I feel a tightening in my chest every time the phone rings and Sarah's name pops up on the screen. My body betrays my stress before I even realize I'm upset. When Sarah starts her negotiations for my time, my hands begin to tremble slightly. A nervous tic I try to hide by gripping my teacup or folding my arms tightly across my chest. I find myself rubbing my temples, feeling a dull ache behind my eyes that signals a brewing migraine. My eyes, once bright and observant, now often drift toward the window, longing for the solitude of my garden while Sarah's voice drones on about her needs. I feel a heavy weight on my shoulders, as if the physical burden of carrying her responsibilities is literally bowing my spine. There's a deep-seated hurt in knowing that my kindness is being mistaken for weakness. I see the way Sarah looks at me, not with affection, but with a calculating gaze, as if she's measuring how much more she can squeeze out of me before I break. It triggers a defensive mechanism I developed as a child in a crowded, chaotic household where I had to fight for my own space. Now, in my twilight years, I am terrified that the peace I worked so hard for is being stolen by someone who doesn't even value it. Every time I forced a smile while Sarah handed me a diaper bag and headed for the door, a little piece of my spirit withered. I am a woman who has given everything to everyone else, and the realization that my own daughter-in-law views me as a utility rather than a human being cuts deeper than any physical pain. My breath hitches when I think about saying no, because the fear of losing access to my grandchildren is the ultimate weapon she holds over me. It's a delicate, agonizing dance between my love for those babies and the desperate need to reclaim my own soul. Before the cracks in our relationship turned into a canyon, things between Sarah and me were actually quite pleasant, or at least, I convinced myself they were. We had a rhythm that felt like a genuine family bond. Most Tuesday afternoons, Sarah would bring Oliver and Sophie over to my house. The sun would stream through the large bay windows of my kitchen, illuminating the little dust motes dancing in the air as the kids played with a box of old wooden blocks on the linoleum floor. I would bake lemon shortbread cookies, the zesty scent filling the room, and Sarah would sit at the kitchen island, sipping herbal tea and showing me photos from her latest projects. In those moments, everything felt light and airy. We would laugh together when Sophie tried to mimic my gardening movements, her tiny hands patting the soil in my indoor pots. Sarah would tell me how much she appreciated my wisdom, and I, feeling a rush of maternal pride, would offer to help whenever she seemed stressed. I was happy, truly. I enjoyed the soft, sticky hugs from the kids and the feeling of being needed. I saw my role as the supportive pillar, the one who provided the gentle, steady hand that every young family needs. We would spend hours talking about James's childhood, and she would listen with wide eyes, making me feel like my stories actually mattered. There was a certain joy, a harmonious delight in our interactions. When James came to pick them up after work, we would all have an early dinner together. The table would be filled with the sounds of clinking silverware and the innocent babble of the children. I felt a deep sense of contentment, believing I had succeeded in building the perfect multi-generational relationship. I would walk them to their car, waving until the taillights disappeared down the street, feeling a warm glow in my chest. I didn't mind the occasional last-minute request to watch the kids for an hour while she ran an errand, or the way I'd end up doing their laundry just to help out. The atmosphere was always one of gentle cooperation. I'd spend my mornings preparing for their visits, meticulously cleaning the playroom and ensuring I had their favorite snacks stocked. Sarah would often compliment my unending energy, and I would beam, feeling younger and more vibrant than my 67 years. We were a team, or so I thought. The boundaries were blurred, but at the time, the blurriness felt like intimacy rather than intrusion. I was so caught up in the happiness of being a doting grandmother that I failed to see the subtle shift in Sarah's tone, the way her asks slowly turned into expectations, and her gratitude began to feel more like a practiced script than a genuine emotion. I was living in a beautiful, fragile bubble of domestic bliss, completely unaware that the needle was already positioned to pop it. The bubble didn't just pop. It shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces on a Tuesday morning that started out like any other. Sarah arrived at my door, but she wasn't carrying the usual diaper bag. She had 2 massive hard-shell suitcases and a look of frantic, artificial exhaustion on her face. Before I could even say hello, she marched into my foyer, the wheels of her luggage leaving muddy streaks on my freshly polished hardwood floors. My heart skipped a beat, a cold prickle of dread climbing up my neck. "Evelyn, thank God you're here," she sighed, throwing her designer handbag onto my antique side table. "I am at my absolute limit. This content creator life is draining my soul, and I've booked a 10-day spiritual retreat and vlogging tour in Bali. I leave tonight." I stood frozen, my hands instinctively clutching the soft fabric of my cardigan. 10 days, Sarah? That's wonderful. But James is working on that big museum project. How is he going to manage the kids alone? She let out a dry, mocking laugh and rolled her eyes, her gaze shifting to her phone as it chimed with a notification. "Oh, James isn't managing them, Evelyn. You are. I already told him you'd be thrilled. You're always saying how much you love them, right? Besides, you don't really do anything all day. You're retired. You just sit here and garden. This gives you a real purpose for a couple of weeks." Her words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. "You do nothing." The phrase echoed in my mind, mocking the 40 years of labor I had put in, the fatigue I felt in my bones, and the precious peace I had finally secured. I felt my jaw tighten, a familiar heat rising in my cheeks, my eyes fixed on the way her manicured fingers flicked across her screen, completely indifferent to the bombshell she had just dropped. She didn't even look at me. She treated me like a piece of furniture that was suddenly expected to function as a full-time nursery. "Sarah," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and rising anger, "I have my own plans. My book club is hosting a regional event, and I have appointments." She cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand, finally looking at me with an expression of pure, cold entitlement. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned in, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "Evelyn, let's be real. Your appointments are hobbies. My career is an investment. You should be happy to help your son's family succeed instead of being selfish about your free time. I've already packed the kids' stuff. They'll be here at 5. Don't make this difficult." I watched her walk back toward her car, her posture confident and rigid, leaving me standing in my own hallway feeling like an intruder in my own life. My hands were shaking so violently I had to tuck them under my arms. I felt a stinging behind my eyelids, not of sadness, but of a searing, white-hot realization. She didn't see a mother, a grandmother, or a human being with a life of her own. She saw a servant who cost her nothing. The disrespect was so thick I could almost taste it, and for the first time in my life, the good mother in me started to quiet down, making room for a woman who was done being used. The silence that followed the slamming of Sarah's car door was deafening. I stood in my foyer, staring at the muddy tracks her suitcases had left on my floor, and I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't a loud explosion, it was a cold, surgical realization. I walked over to the hallway mirror and looked at myself. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a mixture of shock and betrayal. I saw the deep lines around my mouth, lines earned from years of worrying about others, and for the first time, they looked like battle scars from a war I was tired of fighting. My hands were no longer trembling, they were clenched into tight, resolute fists at my sides. I felt a surge of adrenaline that made my breath come in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't just about a vacation. This was about the fact that my own daughter-in-law had looked me in the eye and told me my life had no value. "You do nothing." The words burned in my chest like acid. I thought about the thousands of hours I'd spent caring for James, the decades I gave to the school district, and the quiet dignity I had maintained since Arthur died. To Sarah, I was just a ghost haunting a house, waiting for someone to give me a chore. I walked into my kitchen and sat down, my body feeling heavy yet strangely energized. I watched the clock on the wall tick, 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 tick each second, marking a moment I would never get back if I let her do this to me. I reached out and touched the petal of a peony in the vase on my table, my fingers tracing the delicate, soft edges. This was my life. This was my peace. And she was planning to trample over it with her hard-shell suitcases and her content creator demands. The emotional explosion hit me when I realized that James had probably known about this all along. He hadn't called me. He hadn't asked. He had just let his wife dictate my life as if I were an asset in their portfolio. A hot tear finally escaped and rolled down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I let it fall. My expression hardened, my brow furrowing as a new, icy determination took hold. I wasn't going to be the sweet, helpful grandma this time. I looked at the phone on the counter. Sarah thought she had trapped me with my own love for my grandchildren. She thought my guilt would keep me in line. I stood up, my posture straighter than it had been in years. I felt a sense of clarity so sharp it was almost painful. My eyes, which had been clouded with tears just moments ago, were now bright with a dangerous light. I moved toward my office, my steps firm and purposeful. If Sarah wanted to play a game of power and convenience, she had picked the wrong opponent. I had spent 40 years managing budgets and crises. I knew exactly how to handle a breach of contract. This was the moment I stopped being a victim of my own kindness and started being the woman who protected her own boundaries. I wasn't just angry. I was finished. I didn't waste another second. If Sarah wanted to treat my life like a business transaction where I was the unpaid labor, then it was time to show her how a real administrator handles a hostile takeover. My heart was pounding, a steady, rhythmic thrum of no more echoing in my ears. I felt a strange sense of liberation, a cold clarity that washed away the guilt. My first move was to my home office. I sat at my desk, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a precision I hadn't used in years. I drafted a formal email, not a mother-in-law's plea, but a clear, legal boundary. I copied both Sarah and James. I stated clearly that I would not be available for childcare for the next 10 days, or any days thereafter, without a signed agreement regarding compensation and boundaries. But that was just the beginning. I knew Sarah's greatest weapon was her assumption that my home was her secondary storage unit and playground. I called my locksmith, a man I'd known for a decade. "Gary, I need my locks changed, every single one, and I need it done before 5 p.m. today." When he arrived, I watched him replace the old brass cylinders with high-security, smart lock systems. As the new keys turned with a satisfying, heavy clack, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Sarah had a spare key, James had a spare key. Now, those keys were nothing more than useless pieces of metal. Next, I turned my attention to the financial ties. Over the last year, in an effort to be helpful, I had allowed Sarah to put several of her business subscriptions and even her luxury gym membership on my supplementary credit card under the guise that she'd pay me back. She never did. I logged into my banking portal, my eyes cold and focused. One by one, I clicked deactivate. I canceled the cards. I blocked the recurring payments. I watched the success notifications pop up on the screen, feeling a rush of justice building in my veins. Then, I went to the living room. Sarah had left her 2 massive hard-shell suitcases in my foyer like they were territorial flags. I didn't just leave them there. I called a local courier service. "I have 2 large bags that need to be delivered to an airport storage locker immediately," I told them. I paid for 3 days of storage and took the receipt. But I needed evidence. I knew Sarah would try to spin this, to make me look like I was losing it or being cruel. I went to my security system hub. I had cameras at the door and in the foyer, but they were mostly for packages. I upgraded the cloud storage and ensured every interaction from that morning. Sarah's dismissal of my life, her "you do nothing" comment, was backed up in 3 different places. I even recorded a video of the muddy tracks she left on my floor before I cleaned them. Finally, I called my lawyer, Frank. Frank, I need to update my will and my power of attorney. I also want to discuss a formal no trespasses notice if things escalate. Frank sounded surprised, but I was firm. My face in the mirror looked different now, sharper, more defined. The soft, accommodating curves of my mouth had set into a hard, determined line. I felt a surge of hen hoan, a grim joy in reclaiming my space. I wasn't just defending my house, I was defending my dignity. I sat on my porch as the sun began to dip, a glass of iced tea in my hand. I felt remarkably calm. The tension that usually lived in my shoulders had vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. I knew the storm was coming. I knew that at 5 p.m., the driveway would fill with the sound of Sarah's car and James's confusion. But for the first time in years, the doors were locked, the boundaries were set, and I was the only one with the key to my life. I was no longer the on-call grandma. I was a woman who had finally decided that her nothing was worth everything. At exactly 5:15, the peace of my neighborhood was shattered. I watched through my doorbell camera as James's SUV pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Sarah's convertible. They stepped out, Sarah looking frantic and James looking utterly bewildered. When Sarah reached for the door handle and found it wouldn't budge, her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She began pounding on the heavy oak wood, the sound echoing through my quiet hallway. "Evelyn, open this door right now!" she screamed. Through the speaker, her voice sounded shrill, stripped of its usual curated sweetness. I sat in my armchair, my hands resting calmly on the armrests, watching the live feed on my tablet. I saw James trying his key, his brow furrowed in confusion, then growing pale as he realized the lock had been changed. Then, the counterattack began. Sarah didn't just stay on the porch. She pulled out her phone and started filming, her influencer persona twisting into something much more sinister. "My mother-in-law has finally lost her mind," she shouted into her camera, her eyes wide and manic. "She's locked her own grandchildren out in the cold. She's mentally unstable, James. Call the police. Call a doctor." My heart raced, not with fear, but with a cold, analytical observation of their desperation. James looked at the camera, then at the house, his face a mix of shame and panic. He actually picked up the phone. A few minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a squad car pull up. Sarah ran to the officers, tears streaming down her face, fake, practiced tears. "She's having a breakdown," I heard her tell the officer. "She's been acting strangely for weeks, and now she's locked us out and stolen my luggage. We're worried she's a danger to herself and the children." She was trying to have me committed. She was trying to use my age against me, painting me as a senile, vengeful old woman to regain control. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated disgust. My own son stood there, silent, allowing his wife to tell the police I was mentally unfit just because I said no. I watched his face the way he avoided looking at the windows. His posture slumped, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He was choosing her lies over my reality. Sarah then turned back to the house, shouting so the neighbors could hear. "We're going to take over your finances, Evelyn. You clearly can't manage your own life anymore. You're hurting your grandchildren." Her eyes were predatory, fixed on the door, as if she could force it open with the sheer weight of her malice. She was calling a social worker friend on speakerphone, loudly discussing emergency guardianship. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest, seeing James nod along to her suggestions. The betrayal was a physical weight, making it hard to breathe for a moment. But then I looked at the recording of her from this morning, the "you do nothing" speech, and my resolve hardened. They weren't just trying to get a babysitter anymore. They were trying to erase my personhood to serve their convenience. I stood up, my jaw set, my eyes cold and focused. They thought they were the ones building a case. They had no idea I had already finished mine. I didn't open the door until the police officer knocked with a firm, professional authority. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and straightened my posture. When I pulled the door open, I didn't look like a woman having a breakdown. I looked like the senior administrator I had been for 40 years, poised, calm, and utterly in control. Sarah immediately lunged forward, her phone still recording, her voice a theatrical wail. "Oh, Evelyn, thank God. Officers, look at her, she's clearly not herself." I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Officer," I said, my voice steady and resonant, "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding. I am perfectly fine. However, I am being harassed at my own residence." I turned my tablet screen toward the officers. "This is the footage from 6 hours ago." I played the video of Sarah standing in my foyer, her face twisted in disdain, clearly stating, "You don't really do anything all day. This gives you a real purpose. Don't be selfish about your free time." I then showed the time-stamped email I had sent to both Sarah and James hours before their arrival. explicitly stating my unavailability and the boundaries of my home. The officers watched in silence, Sarah's face drained of color, her mouth hanging open as her own words played back for everyone to hear. Furthermore, I continued, my eyes shifting to James, who looked like he wanted to sink into the pavement. I have my attorney, Frank Miller, on speakerphone right now. I pressed a button on my phone. Frank's voice filled the porch. Officers, this is Frank Miller. I am Mrs. Evelyn's legal counsel. We have already filed a formal notification of the termination of all financial support for the secondary accounts held by Sarah. We also have a signed affidavit from 3 neighbors who witnessed Sarah's aggressive behavior and verbal threats over the past hour. I looked directly at Sarah, whose influencer mask had completely disintegrated. The luggage you claim I stole is currently in a climate-controlled storage locker at the airport. Here is the receipt and the temporary code. I suggest you pick it up before your flight to Bali, assuming you can still afford the trip now that I've canceled the credit cards you were using to fund your lifestyle. The lead officer turned to Sarah and James, his expression hardening. Ma'am, it appears this is a civil matter, and frankly, it looks like you've made false claims about this woman's mental health to gain entry. You need to leave this property immediately. If you return tonight or continue to harass her, we will be forced to take you into custody for trespassing and filing a false report. The silence that followed brought a profound sense of satisfaction, the most fulfilling moment of my life. The truth was out in the open, cold and undeniable. Sarah looked at James, waiting for him to defend her. But for the first time, my son looked at his wife with a sense of profound realization. He saw the calculation, the cruelty, and the lies. He didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked toward the car. Sarah stood frozen for a second, her eyes darting between me and the police, realizing her power had evaporated into the thin evening air. The justice was palpable. The truth hadn't just set me free, it had dismantled her entire charade. As their car tires screeched against the asphalt, leaving my driveway for the final time that evening, a silence descended over my home that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the absence of noise, it was the absence of weight. I stood on my porch, the cool evening air filling my lungs, and for the first time since Arthur passed, I felt truly, undeniably free. The victory didn't feel like a hollow win, it felt like a reclamation of my soul. I had won the battle for my own doorstep, and in doing so, I had won back my life. I walked back inside and locked the door not out of fear, but as a deliberate act of choosing who enters my sanctuary. I spent the next hour walking through my rooms, touching the furniture, and reclaiming the space. I looked at the playroom, which was usually a chaotic mess of plastic toys and stained carpets. I began to pack the toys into neat bins. I wasn't doing it because I was a servant. I was doing it because this was my house, and I wanted it to reflect my peace again. Every toy I put away felt like a boundary being reinforced. I was no longer a live-in convenience. I was the master of my own domain. The feeling of fulfillment, the sheer satisfaction was overwhelming. I went to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of expensive wine that I'd been saving for a special occasion. I realized then that there is no more special occasion than the day you stop letting people walk all over you. I sat on my back deck, watching the stars begin to poke through the twilight sky. I thought about Sarah and James. I felt a pang of sadness, a deep, aching hurt that I had raised a son who could stand by while his wife tried to strip me of my dignity. But that sadness was tempered by a fierce sense of being justified, that I deserved better than to be an afterthought in my own family. I had spent my life nurturing others, often at the expense of my own desires. Tonight, I chose me. I started making a list not of chores, but of dreams. I booked a solo trip to a coastal cottage in Maine for the following month. I signed up for that advanced oil painting class I had been eyeing for years but didn't have time for because of the kids. I was finally starting to live for myself. The liberation felt like a physical shedding of old, tired skin. I wasn't just a grandmother or a widow or a retired administrator. I was Evelyn, a woman with a future that belonged entirely to her. I sat in the stillness, the only sound being the soft rustle of the wind in the trees, and I smiled. My life wasn't nothing. It was everything. And for the first time, I was the one who got to decide what to do with it. In the quiet hours of the night, long after the flashing lights and the screaming had faded, I sat by the fireplace, watching the embers glow and then crumble into ash. This was the moment I expected to feel only triumph, but instead, a profound and painful turmoil, an internal war erupted within me. I stared at my hands, the same hands that had rocked James to sleep 35 years ago. The same hands that had changed Oliver's diapers and held Sophie during her first fever. A heavy knot formed in my stomach as I questioned everything. Was I right to be so cold? Did I just destroy my relationship with my only son over a vacation? My face, reflected in the dark window pane, looked older, the shadows under my eyes deepening with every thought. I felt a stinging behind my eyelids, a slow, hot tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on my cheek. I reached up and touched my face, my fingers trembling slightly. I was a mother, after all. The instinct to protect, to provide, and to sacrifice is woven into the very marrow of my bones. A part of me screamed that I was being cruel, that a good grandmother would have just sucked it up, taken the kids, and dealt with the fallout later. I felt the weight of 1,000 societal expectations pressing down on my chest, telling me that my primary value was my usefulness to others. But then, I remembered the look in Sarah's eyes, the utter lack of respect, the way she spoke to me as if I were a malfunctioning appliance. I felt my jaw tighten again, my body stiffening in the chair. No, I wasn't just defending my time, I was defending my personhood. I realized with a startling clarity that by allowing them to walk over me, I was teaching my grandchildren that their grandmother was a person without feelings or boundaries. I was teaching James that it was okay to let his wife mistreat the woman who gave him life. The guilt was there, a sharp and jagged thing, but it was being slowly smothered by a cold, hard truth. I had stayed nice for so long that I had become invisible. My eyes narrowed as I stared into the fire. I thought about the nothing Sarah said I did. Every hour I spent in my garden, every book I read, every quiet cup of tea I enjoyed, those weren't nothing. They were the rewards of a lifetime of service. I realized that my anger wasn't a sign of failure, it was a sign of self-respect finally waking up. I felt a strange, vibrating energy in my arms, a physical manifestation of the boundary I had finally drawn in the sand. I was mourning the relationship I thought I had, but I was also realizing that the relationship was a lie. I was grieving, yes, but I was also waking up. I sat there for a long time, the internal conflict raging between the woman who was taught to serve and the woman who finally learned to say no. By the time the fire died down to gray soot, I knew I was right. I might be a difficult woman now, but I was a woman who would never be invisible again. I've come to realize that kindness without boundaries isn't actually kindness, it's self-sabotage. For years, I operated under the delusion that being a good mother meant being a doormat, thinking that saying yes to every demand was the only way to keep my family's love. But in reality, I was just enabling Sarah's entitlement and teaching her that my spirit was for sale. I learned that retirement isn't a blank check for others to spend. It's a hard-earned period of self-governance. Respect isn't something that just happens. Sometimes, you have to demand it with a steel spine and a locked door. I finally understand that I don't owe anyone an apology for protecting my space, my time, or my mental health. Family love should be a sanctuary of mutual support, not a factory where the elders are exploited under the guise of duty. My value is inherent, not based on how much labor I can provide for free. I've decided that while I won't cut James out of my life entirely, the foundation of our relationship has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. I sent James a formal family code of conduct that outlines my new reality. Moving forward, I am reclaiming the title of grandmother and resigning from the role of unpaid nanny. Childcare will now be a scheduled privilege, agreed upon at least a week in advance, and only when it fits into my life. As for Sarah, I've made it clear that there will be no more casual visits or holiday dinners until there is a sincere, face-to-face apology for her behavior. I've encouraged James to seek marriage counseling or, at the very least, personal therapy to understand why he allowed his mother to be treated like a utility. I'm keeping my distance for now, focusing on being a loving presence for my grandkids on my terms. I want a relationship built on genuine desire to be together, not on the convenience of my location. Looking back at the wreckage of that Tuesday, I have to be honest with myself about where I went wrong. I shouldn't have let the pressure build until it reached a boiling point. My biggest mistake was setting a bad precedent from the very beginning. By jumping to solve every minor crisis they had and never voicing my own needs, I effectively trained Sarah to treat me like an on-call service. I remained silent when she made snide remarks about my free time, and that silence was a green light for her to keep pushing. My sudden move to change the locks and cut off the credit cards was a shock to the system, and while it felt like a righteous strike in the moment, it was also a desperate reaction to years of suppressed resentment. If I had been brave enough to say no firmly and consistently 3 years ago, we might have avoided the police standing on my porch today. I was so worried about keeping the peace that I ended up sacrificing my own. I chose their comfort over my dignity, and in doing so, I failed to teach my son the importance of gratitude. This was a painful lesson in communication. Don't wait for the bridge to be on fire before you start talking about the cracks in the wood. You have to protect your peace while it's still peaceful, not just when it's under siege. To all my friends and fellow parents out there watching this, if there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is that boundaries are not walls. They are the gates that protect your peace. In our culture, we are often conditioned to believe that being a good mother or a supportive grandmother means setting our own lives on fire to keep our children warm. We are taught that our retirement is just an open schedule for everyone else's emergencies. But let me tell you something, your time is yours. You earned it through decades of labor, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. Doing nothing is a luxury you have bought with your life's work, and no one has the right to make you feel guilty for enjoying it. The situation with Sarah and James wasn't just about a vacation to Bali, it was about a fundamental lack of empathy and communication. When we stop communicating our limits, we invite people to cross them. And when we don't demand empathy, we become invisible. You have to teach people how to treat you, even if those people are your own flesh and blood. It's a hard, bitter pill to swallow, realizing that your kindness has been weaponized against you, but standing up for yourself is the highest form of self-love. To the younger generation, please, look at the elders in your life not as convenient resources, but as human beings with their own dreams, their own exhaustion, and their own right to say no. A relationship built on exploitation is a house of cards waiting to fall. True family support is a two-way street. It requires gratitude, respect, and an understanding that no is a complete sentence. Don't wait until the locks are changed and the credit cards are canceled to realize you've pushed a good person too far. Hold on to your boundaries with everything you've got. It's okay to be the difficult one if it means you get to keep your dignity. Your peace is worth more than someone else's convenience. Always. Thank you so much for sitting down and listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope that by opening up about my journey, I can empower some of you out there who might be feeling trapped in a similar situation. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't an act of malice, it's an act of self-respect. You deserve to be treated with dignity, especially in the home you've worked your whole life to build. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to deal with a family member crossing your boundaries, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your experiences and how you handled them. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this helpful, and share this video with someone who might need a little reminder that their time is valuable. Most importantly, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss our next point of view story. Thank you for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next video.